So, I bought a Konami game in 2020. Who knew Konami was still publishing games, let alone ones that looked interesting enough for me to play? The game in question, and the topic of this video, is Skelattack. Skelattack was released June 2nd, 2020, developed by indie dev team Yakuza Inc., and was published by Konami. Seriously, when the hell was the last time Konami published a game worth playing? 2015? Well, I guess Konami decided to stop wasting their time making pachinko machines and actually publish a game. Yakuza Inc. is a small indie dev team who only has 2 completed games and 1 work in progress on their website. So, what is Skelattack? Skelattack is a 2D platforming game. It's advertised as a Metroidvania, but it's not really a Metroidvania. There isn't really any required backtracking or map expansion beyond going back to the hub town for some minor upgrades. It's more of a linear action game. You can use the fast travel system to revisit old areas, but there's literally zero incentive to do so. Of course, the most defining feature of the game is the hand-drawn graphics. As I always say when it comes to these kind of games, I am a sucker for hand-drawn graphics. Shantae, Cuphead, Dust, Hollow Knight, and now Skelattack. I just love the look of hand-drawn animated graphics in games, and I will 100% admit that I impulse bought this game at full price because of that fact. Unfortunately, Skelattack is kind of a mixed bag in terms of overall graphical presentation, though. I like the backgrounds, they're all detailed, lively, and very cool. The game kind of gives a Halloween celebration vibe early on, then goes into full dungeon crawler aesthetic by the end. Environments are a bit generic, but varied enough in the confines of the game to keep it somewhat interesting. Some of the animations are just gorgeous as well, fluid and fun to watch, like watching a cartoon. But it's not perfect. First off, the game is locked at 30 frames per second. It's playable, but definitely doesn't look as smooth as games like Hollow Knight. Sorry to bring up Hollow Knight again, but it really is the new standard for Metroidvania platformer type games and hand-drawn graphics. Skelattack is also locked in at a 1920 by 1080 resolution. This makes things look a little blurry on my 1380 by 2160 monitor. I know that Skelattack was made by a small indie team, but it was backed and published by Konami. If Team Cherry, a developer consisting of 3 people, can make Hollow Knight scaled up to 4K resolution and running at an uncapped frame rate, why couldn't a game that was published by Konami? It's unfortunate, because the enhanced resolution would have really helped the art style in some places. Furthermore, while many of the animations are fluid and gorgeous, others are stiff and lackluster, especially when it comes to how the human characters look. They just don't look great. All the undead characters and environments look really great though. I mean, look at this bar. It's so lively and well animated, but many of the human characters just look As a whole, I think the graphics and art style are charming and fun, but it just isn't as polished or well done as other games with similar art styles. The story of Skelattack is told through dialogue that you need to read. There aren't really any animated cutscenes, and there is no voice acting. Skelattack sees a newly resurrected skeleton warrior, Skullivan, and his bat friend Imber, as he prepares for his Remembrance Day, a day in which members of the undead discover who they were in their past life. Unfortunately, Scully's town Aftervale is attacked by human invaders. They kidnap the town elder and the Blue Flame, an artifact which gives the undead their new life. It's up to Scully and Imber to save Aftervale, drive down the human invaders, and discover not only who they were, but who they were meant to be. I actually like the setting. It's kind of reverse Dungeons & Dragons. Instead of playing as a human warrior battling your way through hordes of undead on a quest to save your town from an undead scourge or claim treasure from a crypt, the undead are the good guys, defending their home and way of life from a violent human clan that wants to wipe them out just for being unnatural. It's a unique spin on a common fantasy trope, and one that I liked. The story and dialogue as a whole are pretty cheesy. Still, the game also tries to tell some philosophical morals, like your past self doesn't dictate who your present self is, and it's possible to do great things despite your past transgressions. In this world, there is redemption in death, and opportunity to atone for the sins you committed while you were living. Like I said, it's kinda cheesy, but it's also kinda charming. Gameplay is also a bit of a mixed bag. Things take time to get used to. At its core, Skelattack is a typical action platforming game. You have a sword attack, which is upgradable, a couple spells that you can cast, which include healing, a rib boomerang, and sonar, which helps you find hidden platforms. You jump, you fight enemies, you jump up walls, find keys to unlock doors, etc. It's pretty standard stuff. The platforming and combat just doesn't feel all that great though, at least early on. Combat is a little stiff, with no real combos, parry system, aside from deflecting projectiles with an upgrade later on, there's no dashing, etc. Combat kinda just comes down to jumping around to try and avoid attacks, and spamming your slash. Your slash is only a single move, so again, it feels kinda stiff. Once you get used to it, it's not that bad. You'll find yourself hopping around and dodging enemy attacks and positioning yourself to attack, but again, it just takes some getting used to. Wall jumping also takes getting used to. Instead of hugging the wall and pressing jump to bounce off like you would in Mega Man or, like Hollow Knight, you press away with the D-pad to bounce off. It doesn't sound horrible on paper, but like I keep saying, it just takes some time to get used to. It doesn't feel quite right. You also always bounce up and opposite of the wall too, instead of directly across from it, which makes it hard to avoid getting hit by spikes sometimes, and really hard to climb up the wall in general. I got used to it after a while, and was able to perform platforming with little issue, but it's just not as tight as similar games are. Additionally, the hitboxes in general are just wonky, and with spikes and things insta-killing you, it gets frustrating at times. It's hard to avoid taking damage or dying sometimes because of the awkwardness of the platforming and the unforgiving hitboxes. There are some Metroidvania-light elements as well, in that there is a currency you get for killing enemies, and you lose this currency upon dying as well. You need to go back to the main hub town for upgrades and travel back to finish the levels, but each environment is really its own independent level, and even though it's technically a sort of interconnected map, it doesn't really feel like one. It feels like separate levels. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's not really a Metroidvania in that aspect. The only other things I have to say regarding gameplay is that the game is pretty easy. Aside from some annoying platforming sections, the game really isn't all that challenging. Even boss fights are a walk in the park. And the game is very short. I beat it in a little over 3 hours on my first playthrough. I imagine I can cut it down even more if I played through it again. The game costs $20, which is pretty steep considering the game can be beaten in 3 hours. Comparing it to Hollow Knight again, the game costs $15, and you can easily get between 60 and 80 hours of gameplay on your first playthrough. Not that game length is the be-all and end-all for determining a game's value. I actually think its short length keeps Skelattack from wearing out its welcome and becoming tedious, or showing more cracks in its gameplay design. But considering everything else I've discussed involving presentation and gameplay, it's hard to recommend it over similar games that are out there. I don't want to be overly negative on Skelattack though. For what looks like a small indie dev team's second game, it's pretty impressive. The visuals and environments, while flawed, are charming and fun to look at. Animations can be really great at times. Platforming and combat take some time to get used to, but overall the mechanics aren't bad. And for a short little game, I certainly had fun. But on the flip side, for a game published by a major company like Konami, I'd expect it to be a bit longer and more polished. That said, not every game can be Hollow Knight, and that's perfectly okay. Not every game needs to be an 8 or a 9 or a 10 to be enjoyable. If you're a fan of these hand-drawn platformers, I do overall recommend checking Skelattack out, if not anything else for checking out an indie dev's work and enjoying another hand-drawn game. But maybe wait for it to go on sale first.